Hi, T2W Wheels here, and on this how-to video, we're going to be upgrading our rear subframe bolts to the Eagle Mike drill-through subframe bolt kit. So stick around and we'll get started right after this. Okay, so before we actually get started working on the bike, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about why I chose to do this and also get into some details about bolt hardness and why it's important. First of all, the KLR650s are known for having weak subframe bolts. From the factory, they come with a head mark of a 7, which equates to about an 8.8 in a metric bolt hardness, and I will get into some more details here in just a moment and showing you some charts and graphs on that. The bolts that we're upgrading to in the Eagle Mike kit are 12.9, which are among the hardest bolts that you can get, and therefore the strongest. So the reasons I want to upgrade that, there's a lot of videos and notes out there about how the subframes bolts can shear off or break and kind of leave you stranded out off the trail. If you're carrying any more than standard weight, which is not much for the rating for these bikes. I do ride 2-up quite a bit with my wife. Also, I will be installing some panniers in the near future and plan on carrying more and more weight. Now, I have already upgraded the rear suspension with a heavier spring to handle that weight, but that alone is not enough. You also need to upgrade your subframe bolts, which is what we're going to be doing today. So, having said that, let's take a closer look at the unboxing of the Eagle Mike kit. I'll also show you some comparisons of the factory bolts, the SW Motec bolts, as well as the Eagle Mike bolt comparison. Okay, so now we want to take a closer look at what comes in the Eagle Mike kit, and then I want to talk with you a little bit about bolt hardness, the ratings, and what all that means to help clarify. So again, this is the Eagle Mike, Eagle Manufacturing subframe bolt upgrade kit for the bikes that have the Tusk or the SW Motec crash bars installed. So the only difference is that it gives you a longer top bolt. If you do not have the Tusk or SW Motec crash bars installed, they send you a shorter top bolt with a spacer. So let's unpack this. First of all, there's two basic types of kits that are available from Eagle Mike. One is the standard replacement bolts, which simply just give you replacement bolts to take your old bolts out, top and bottom, and put the new ones in. So there'll be 2 top and 2 bottom. The drill through kit is a little different because what you're going to do is you're going to drill through the top frame, and I'll show you a picture here. Normally you have the 2 bolts in the top, and then they stop, and then you have your frame in the middle. But in our case, what we're going to do is we're going to drill all the way through and then use 1 long bolt to go across the top. So what you get in the Eagle Mike kit is you get 2 drill bits that they send you, and they're nice quality drill bits because it's a hard frame that you're drilling through. You get the 5/16 inch drill bit, and then you get a 13/32 inch drill bit that come with the kit. You get the main top bolt itself, which is here, and again, this is the longer one because I have the SW Motec crash bars. You get a locking nut for that bolt, and then of course you get the 2 lower bolts that replace your factory bolts in the lower subframe mounts. So there, and then lastly you get, well not lastly, but you get 2 washers for the lower subframe bolts, and then you also get a set of printed text description of the installation process. So this is what comes in this kit. This kit is $24 from Eagle Mike's website, and I'll have the link to his website in the description below. You can also get these from Rocky Mountain ATV MC for a penny less, for $23.99. I happened to order mine through Rocky Mountain because I was ordering some other gear from them, and I just added this to the order. Now, if you order from Eagle Mike, there's some advantages as far as options available. With Eagle Mike's website, you can say, I don't want the drill bits if you already have the drill bits, and that'll save you $6. So you can take the drill bits out. You can also add an option for an extra bolt. top bolt, not the lower bolts. So you can add an extra top bolt for $4 if you want to have a spare on hand. Now, I didn't do that because I personally don't think this bolt is going to break under the conditions that I'm going to ride it. And I'll tell you why here in a little bit because of the ratings on it. But the kit, as you see it here, came from Rocky Mountain, and it was $23.99. Now, depending upon when you order and how old this video is when you see it, their prices may fluctuate. But at the time of this recording, that was the cost of the kit. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what these ratings of the bolts actually represent. I'm going to put up a chart here, this chart, but it talks about the classifications of metric bolts. Now, US bolts are completely different because they have the radial lines on the bolts that represent whether it's like a grade 8, grade 7, whatever the case may be. Just forget about all that right now because we're talking about metric bolts. And metric bolts have a head stamp on them of their classes. So it's a class 8.8, class 10.9, class 12.9, etc. And you'll see that on the chart. Basically, you'll see there's three columns. It talks about the proof load, the minimum yield strength, and the minimum tensile strength. And they're rated in MPa, or which is also known as a megapascal. So that's what the MPa rating represents. Now, a megapascal, as you can see at the bottom, is equal to roughly a 1 Newton meter squared or 145 pounds per square inch. The factory bolts that come in the KLR have a head mark of 7 on them. At least mine did. Now, a 7 is roughly equivalent to an 8.8 class metric bolt. So as you can see, that is up at the top there, 8.8. Now, my bike has the SW Motec crash bars on it. And when you buy the SW Motec kit, crash bar kit, you get new bolts to replace the upper subframe bolts. Again, it's not drill through. Here's the bolt that came out of it. I took one out to show you. But they have a head stamp of a 10.9, which you can see on the graph, and also I'll show you a close-up here of the bolt. So a 10.9 is definitely an upgrade and better than the factory bolts, but it's not as strong as they could be. This is the upper subframe bolt that comes in the Eagle Mike kit. Again, drill through, so you can see it's considerably longer. The head mark on the Eagle Mike bolt shows you that it is a 12.9 class bolt. Now, so what does that mean? So you can see on the graph that the 8.8 class bolts and what they're rated at on the proof load, the minimum yield strength, and as well as the tensile strength. So, and you can see the comparisons of the numbers. So the Eagle Mike bolts, they have a proof load of 970 megapascals, and that is equal to 140,687 psi. Now, the minimum yield strength is rated at 1100 megapascals, and that is the equivalent to 159,541 psi. Now, the minimum yield strength is of course, the maximum load at which the material will exhibit specific and permanent deformation. So this bolt is rated up to almost 160,000 psi on the yield strength. Now, the minimum tensile strength, it's rated to a minimum of 176,946 psi, which is, of course, 1,220 megapascal. So you can see that this bolt is substantially stronger than the 10.9, and it is very much stronger than the factory 8.8. Enough boring you with the hows and whys. Let's go ahead and get started with the actual installation. Okay, so I already have the tank off of the bike, as well as the side panels, the seat, and the tank, and I even have the fairings off, the lower fairings off in this particular case, just for clarity of illustration. So one of the first things that we need to do is I've got the bike up on jack stands to make it stable and get the rear wheel off the ground a couple of inches, it's about 3 inches off the ground right now. So at this point, we need to loosen the boot here on the carburetor. This is the carburetor, and then here's the rubber boot back here coming from the air box into the carburetor. And the reason we need to loosen that and take that boot loose is when we remove these top bolts, the subframe bolts, the back half of the bike is going to drop down. And when it does, it's going to pull and put stress on this. So you want to remove this boot. So we're going to just loosen this clamp with a Phillips screwdriver enough to get this boot off of the carburetor. Then I'm just going to peel the edges a little bit, so that'll help get it started. Now over on this side of the bike, the next thing we want to do is to loosen, not remove, but loosen the lower subframe bolts here. And we'll do that on each side. Okay, so now the next step will be to remove the upper subframe bolts here and here from the bike, and then allow that rear end to drop. This bike has the SW Motec crash bars on it, so these are not the stock subframe bolts, upper subframe bolts. So these require a 17 millimeter to break them loose. Bolts are coming out with dried Loctite and all. And we'll take... Before we go any further, I want to show you that there is a spacer. This silver piece that you see on both sides is an aluminum spacer that was part of the crash bar installation. That's why, since you already have these spacers, that's the reason that Eagle Mike does not include the spacer when you get the drill through kit for the bikes with crash bars. So that's, we'll reuse one spacer on one side here. So I'm just going to kind of hold up on the rear end of the bike as I remove that bolt out the rest of the way. And again, that's just to prevent it from falling under its own weight. So now the two bolts have been removed, and I'm just going to ease down on this subframe. So now that we have the subframe dropped down, and here you can see the original mounting point, and here is the arm of the subframe, we have these spacers that we want to remove. It doesn't have to drop down much. In fact, mine wouldn't go any further than this. But here is your original mounting point. We need to be able to get in here and drill. Now, because I have the crash bars, it's going to create a bit of an obstacle here. So here's the arm of the crash bar that's coming up, and it looks like I'm going to need to unbolt it from the front of the bike and drop this crash bar down so that I can get in here and drill through this tube. But a very important thing to remember is you can see now that the air boot has come loose from the carburetor, so there's a gap there. We're going to be drilling and creating metal shavings here, so we want to make sure that we take a clean rag or shop towel or something. I'm going to get that started through here, and we just want to make sure that that hole is covered, that gap is covered, so we don't get any metal shavings in our air box or in the particularly in the carburetor. So I've got that wrapped all the way around that carb and the air boot. So now I have my crash bars loose enough to where I can move them out of the way and get in here to drill in here. Next, I'm going to start with the smaller drill bit and do a pilot hole through this main tube here and drill through. We're going to start and drill through halfway, and then do it halfway from this side, and then meet up. Careful to just try to keep the bit aligned as straight as you possibly can when you're doing this, so that you meet up on the hole on the other side. And there we go. We just punched through to the other side. So I'm going to kind of ream it out here just a little bit on this end. Okay. Now the next step is that we will swap out to the larger bit and then just finish the hole out. Okay, so we now have our 13/32 inch bit in the drill. And we're just going to use the pilot hole we just drilled to just enlarge that a little bit. Okay, so now we've reached all the way through. As you can see, the drill bit is, so this is a larger drill bit, 13/32, so it's now gone all the way through. So next thing we want to do is clean up all these shavings. I'll use a shop vac for some, air hose, clean everything up nice, start putting it back together. Test fit, and the new Eagle Mike bolt slides all the way through. So it's in there, it's a good fit. Next thing is we'll go ahead and start to reassemble. So what we want to do is to gently just remove the cloth and watch for shavings, make sure nothing is loose in there. So lifting up on the subframe to check that alignment. Have it through the crash bar. The spacer, I know it's hard to see because of cables, but there is the spacer there. Then into the subframe hole, and then into the main frame. So I'm going to tap this through with a rubber mallet. It's not to damage the bolt. Gently drive through, and there you can see it starting to come out the other side. So it didn't take a lot of force. If you are trying to reinstall this bolt and it's just not going through, then don't try to force it and damage the threads. What you want to do is back it out, pull it out, and maybe run your drill bit through a couple more times just to get rid of any possible burrs or maybe any sort of misalignment issues. So there. So now we're putting our spacer back in, and then next would be the crash bar. Would go over that and start the nut. So to tighten these, the head of the bolt itself uses I have a number 8 hex wrench adapter for my socket, and then the nut is a 17 millimeter. So let's go ahead and get these in here. Okay, I have these nice and tight. The instructions said to torque to at least 33 foot-pounds, but not more than 50 foot-pounds if you have gaps. Fortunately, my frame is not bent and I had no gaps, so I was able to torque it to about 40 foot-pounds, and everything was just fine. Better tight. So that's in there. The next step now is to remove each of the lower subframe bolts and replace them with the Eagle Mike bolts. Okay, so we're removing the lower subframe bolts here. And there's that one. Now, an interesting note. Earlier in the video, I told you that the bolts came with a number 7 head stamp, and that one does. So the one on the left side of the bike had a number 7, but the one that was on the right side of the bike was clearly marked as a 10.9 metric bolt. As a 10.9. So that one was on the other side of the bike. So I had 2 bolts on the subframe on this bike that had 2 different hardness bolts. So I'm kind of glad I'm very glad I'm replacing them with known bolts right now. We have the Eagle Mike bolt, and again, this is a 12.9, just like I showed you in the video. This is a 12.9. And then we're going to tighten it down, snug these up, and then I'll come back and torque this to 18 foot-pounds as per the directions. All right, so next thing we have to do is just make sure we tighten up our boot, our air intake boot on the carburetor, and put the bike back together. And that's all there is to it. All right, so I hope this video helps you understand what it takes or what it's like to install the Eagle Mike subframe bolt kit, the drill through kit on a KLR. Not everyone is going to need this upgrade. I wanted the peace of mind of knowing that if I have the bike loaded down with a lot of weight and I'm in some pretty rugged off-road conditions, I don't have to worry about those bolts shearing off or breaking. So for the money, it's a really great insurance policy, if you will, to just know that you have good quality bolts in that subframe, and you've got it as strong as it possibly can be. So the hardest part of the installation was drilling through the top part of the frame. The key things to remember in that piece are taking your time, using a good lubricant, and also trying to keep your drill bit as straight as you possibly can. I didn't seem to have any problems. So you saw firsthand how it works. As always, thank you very much for watching. This is Tim Two Wheels, and that's how I did it.